At Heritage, we believe ideas shape the future, and that you have a role to play in that. That's why we host events on the biggest challenges and opportunities facing our country. These events are spaces for real conversation, bold ideas, and principled solutions. No matter if you're a seasoned policy expert, a passionate advocate, or simply just curious about the issues that shape our society, you're welcome here. So pull up a seat, ask questions, engage with us, and be part of something bigger than politics, the fight for the soul of our nation. Thanks again for joining us, and please enjoy the program.
Please welcome Jay Richards, Vice President of Social and Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation.
Thanks so much for joining us here. Congress, I guess, is in recess just after the long Easter weekend. This is a dark topic, but is one that we have to face squarely. So I know when I first heard the story of Chinese Communist Party organ harvesting markets, global market, honestly, I didn't want to believe it, and I think for most people, it's still in that category. Many of us, certainly conservatives, generally view the Communist Chinese Party in Beijing and the leadership as adversaries rather than potential friends. But even in that case, this is sort of darkness on a new level. So here's just specifically what we want to talk about. This is essentially it. Credible, growing evidence that the Chinese Communist Party is systematically harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience. This reality presents profound moral, ethical, and policy challenges, not only for China and the United States, but for the broader global community. I'm so happy and proud to be able to bring, on behalf of Heritage, to be able to bring experts, mostly from outside the building, that have been working on this for years. So let me briefly introduce what we're going to do. So we will begin with a fireside chat, a conversation with my colleague Bob Moffett and Jan Jekielek, and then after that I will moderate a panel with several other experts. So let me just briefly introduce the first part of our event, and then I'll hand it over. So first is Robert Moffett, who is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation and one of Washington's most influential voices on health policy and government power over the human body. He's a former Reagan official, and I think that Bob may be the last remaining Reagan official that's still full-time at the Heritage Foundation and still going very strong, as you'll see, very energetic guy. He's shaped major debates on healthcare, on Medicare, and on the limits of state control. He was especially busy during the fights over Obamacare and earlier efforts to nationalize medicine. He's a frequent media commentator and a best-selling author. Bob brings decades of experience in health policy research, public service, and legislative analysis. Next is my friend, a senior editor at the Epoch Times and host of American Thought Leaders, Jan Jekielek. Jan has conducted nearly 1,000 long-form interviews with leading thinkers, policymakers, and dissidents. With a background spanning academia, international human rights work, and documentary filmmaking, Jekielek specializes in challenging dominant narratives through in-depth investigation. He's the author of the brand new New York Times bestseller, Kill to Order, which is a powerful expose of the Chinese Communist Party's state-sanctioned organ harvesting from detained religious believers, ethnic minorities, and political dissidents. Jan draws on years of reporting and firsthand research in his book to reveal how the CCP's treatment of the human body exposes the true nature and global threat of the regime. Please join me in welcoming Jan and Bob Moffett.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in for, I don't want to say a treat. This is not a very let's see. Just hold this. Don't touch anything. All right, we got it? Yeah. I'm glad it now worked. Technologically, I'm not exactly advanced. But in any event, we do have copies of Jan's book available for those of you who are interested, available here at the Heritage Foundation. my colleague points out that this is a very unpleasant subject. And as Mike Rowe, who you know, said that not too long ago, that this is something that people don't want to believe or even know about. So, Jan, my question to you is, so our audience here and online can fully grasp the topic, could you please explain, in brief, how this process of live organ harvesting actually works?
I will, and just before I do that, I want to thank Heritage for assembling this amazing event, which actually in the following panel, there's kind of three important figures that actually appear in the book who are going to be on the panel themselves. And I won't go into that detail, but I think it's going to be an amazing conversation. Thank you for that. In terms of how it actually works, it's kind of unbelievable. And I'll start maybe with one of the first whistleblowers. He was an Israeli transplant surgeon, a professor of surgery at Tel Aviv University, who had a patient who basically told him, and I'll never forget talking to him about this on the phone, but that I'm tired of waiting, and I've got it scheduled. I've got a heart transplant scheduled for myself in China in 2 weeks. Okay, and so the massive red flags happening here, right, for this son of Holocaust survivors. One thing is, right, in an ethical transplant situation, what happens is there has to be a catastrophic accident. Okay, so, and someone has to be not completely dead, because once circulation stops, the organs degrade rather quickly. Okay, and then because our bodies reject foreign things, including organs, we have to try to match them as close as possible. So we match things like blood type, tissue type, the size is important. The point is, it's very rare to find the right person to be that donor. That's why you wait months or years for that heart transplant, and sometimes you pass away. And that's why this particularly desperate patient, you know, found another option, or the system actually found another option for him. Of course, Jacob Levy, the surgeon, didn't believe that this was going to happen, but the guy went and got the heart as scheduled, okay, and came back. So two things we knew right away, right? Number one, that catastrophic accident was being arranged by someone, right? Someone is being killed for the organ. And the second part, right, is how are you getting this 2-week wait time, which is basically impossible, right, given how rare it is to find that appropriate match, which even sometimes still gets rejected, right? Well, so in 1999, the Chinese Communist Party picked its new black class, okay? And I'll explain why this is important, okay? Because there's to get this kill to order system, there's two elements which are critical. You basically have to have a state actor, okay? And the reason for that is they have to control the instruments of information, so propaganda, to be able to dehumanize a very large group of people, and they also have to be able to incarcerate a massive group of people. And so this is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party did to Falun Gong practitioners back in 1999, when the dictator at the time decided he was going to use his word, eradicate the group. By the way, eradicate didn't mean kill everybody, okay? Eradicate meant put them into their tried and tested re-education or struggle or transformation system, okay, and basically get them to pledge fealty to the Communist Party and definitely get them to renounce whatever it was that they believed in, right? A spiritual discipline based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, okay? But it turned out that people were that did this practice were very resilient to being re-educated or reformed. And that's when they incarcerated maybe 1 million, maybe 2. We don't know the full number, but in 2005, the Special Rapporteur on Torture at the UN, where actually I met Representative Chris Smith many moons ago, who's going to be speaking shortly, he said that half of all the people in the Chinese Communist Party's massive incarceration system were Falun Gong practitioners, okay? So anyway, massive scale. And so what did they do? They blood typed, tissue typed, and organ scanned these people, okay, with increasing sophistication over the years. And so when this person was basically, when the deal was made, right, we also had evidence that people were paying 100 or 200 grand for these organs, right, a heart transplant. When this deal was made, there's already someone in a database on the Chinese Communist Party side pre-matched okay? And that person can be killed to order on demand. That's why it's a 2-week wait time, because there's enough people in the system and there's enough variation among those people that basically they're pre-matched and ready to go. So that's how it works. And it's a whole different level, right, than your also horrible organ trafficking that you see in other places.
You raise the issue in your book of complicity with this practice and its corrupting effect on medical professionals. Let me ask you this. How specifically do you know that the communist Chinese, how do they solicit these organ recipients in the West? And do we have any evidence of complicity with this practice among Western medical professionals or institutions?
So I'll say at the outset, okay, that the evidence around this, right, we have 20 years of evidence that was gathered by many people, including Ethan Gutman, who's kind of one of the hero researchers who's also going to be speaking in a moment. I'll mention a few types of pieces of evidence we had. For example, prior to 2006, when we first reported on this, and then these things disappeared, there were actual ads online that said, you can come in 2 weeks and get an organ for the right price. Okay, like that actually existed. The problem is, and this is a theme throughout these 20 years, and perhaps Ethan can expand on this a little bit when he comes up later, the moment that you reveal publicly one of the ways of getting the evidence, that disappears, right? So like today we're in the situation where we basically have a black box system. We don't really fully understand what's happening there. We can make some inferences. I can talk about that, like the scale of it and so forth. But to go back to answering your question, one piece of evidence was that there were these prices were being offered and so forth. The issue of complicity, right? For example, there's a group called the Transplantation Society, okay? And the Transplantation Society tried, it seems like, let's assume the best possible faith, right? They obviously saw that there was a problem. If you can't eat, people are getting these transplants regularly in 2 weeks and so forth, it's, there's no ethical scenario where this is happening. So they tried to kind of help them reform, okay? Now on the Chinese Communist Party side, and by the way, this works this way, not just in this area, but basically in all areas. You meet these people that are basically say, look, we're the reformers, we want to make change. Yeah, we know we're sort of rough around the edges, okay? But we're going to facilitate the change. There's those hardliners over there. Now, just don't be very loud about anything you do. Let's keep it quiet. Let's keep it between us, and we'll facilitate this change, right? But don't do anything rash, because the hardliners will get power, and then we'll be back to square one. And this is just kind of a rinse and repeat model, right, of how to actually foster that complicity. Because after a while, if you're the Transplantation Society, it's very hard, you want to show that you've made change, that you've had a positive impact, and you're not really seeing anything like that. You kind of don't want to admit that anymore, because they've kind of pulled you into their system. So that's an example, right? To the point that we train, I don't know how many ultimately, but at least hundreds of those surgeons, we've actually trained them in an industry that, as far as we can tell, is all killed to order, the transplant industry in Communist China. There's no evidence, there's no credible evidence of any sort that they have any sort of an ethical system. And why would they, if, how, as I mentioned, it's very difficult to create that match. By the way, the other part I didn't mention is you have an ethics team in an ethical situation that has to decide that this person's actually dead. And we've even decertified transplant systems in America because people are being too lax on that, okay? So imagine like there's this whole ethical question when the standard over there has been killed to order. If you're one of these dehumanized black classes, right, that is sort of acceptable to do horrible things to, because they've activated this quirk in our psychology that allows us to do that, right? Unfortunately, we've seen that too much in history. That you can basically, you have the almost unlimited fodder. And if you don't have unlimited fodder, 14 or 15 years later, they add another group, which is what they did to the Uyghurs. They dehumanized the Uyghurs as they did the Falun Gong. They incarcerated 1 million plus of them, and they added them, which is, Ethan Gottman has actually written an amazing book. I should be talking about my own book, but the Xinjiang Procedure, an amazing book, came out just before Kill to Order, and it actually looks at the best available evidence around that question, and it's horrifying.
You know, in your book, you argue that this atrocity is a logical result of the adoption of a utilitarian ethics governing medicine, which is directly contrary to the Hippocratic Oath, in which the central focus is the welfare of the individual. Actually, in the traditional Hippocratic Oath, the doctor is a servant of the individual patient. Could you elaborate on this? I mean, the adoption of this utilitarian ethic and what it really means and the effect that it's had beyond China, really.
I absolutely can, but we actually have literally one of the world experts on this question also sitting in the audience, Wesley Smith, and another incredible book that I would recommend, Culture of Death, which if I had read that years ago, I would have understood so much more about this utilitarian bioethics, which has frankly been on the rise in Western society for quite a while. It's just that the Chinese Communist Party is sort of the epitome of it. Have you ever heard how many people here remember this maxim? In order to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. Okay, a lot of people remember that. Okay, that's Joseph Stalin typically. There's debate about whether it was Walter Duranty that actually said that. But let's just say it was Stalin or one of his sort of, supporters or boosters, okay? When you look at from the bioethics perspective, on the one hand, as you mentioned, right? You have a doctor or a health provider working to support an individual person and minimize the harm of any intervention that provider might offer, okay? That's the sort of the one end, that's Hippocratic medicine, okay? The other end is utilitarian bioethics. Utilitarian bioethics, overly simplified a little bit is, and I'm a little embarrassed because, like I said, we have the world expert in the room here, but it's the medicine of the greatest good for the greatest number. So if I think, as a benevolent utilitarian bioethicist, that whatever population-wide intervention I'm going to affect, if that is going to help the mass or most people, it's okay to sacrifice a few, okay? And the problem with this is great, but this is what dawned on me when I was writing this book, because I've been looking at both the health space and, of course, this forced organ harvesting for 20 years, is that if you want to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. That concept, that's actually the epitome of utilitarian bioethics. Okay, because in a communist society, right, someone has to decide what the greatest good is. Like, what is the greatest good for that mass? Who are we going to sacrifice the few to benefit the whole, right? In the communist system, the greatest good, per the Communist Party, is the survival and the supremacy of the Communist Party. Okay, and that's why you get atrocity in every communist society, because when push comes to shove, any number of lives are expendable to attain the greatest good, so to speak. And of course, when we practice that here, right, this utilitarian bioethics, or some sort of road to that omelet, extreme. Similarly, we can make those sacrifices in the mind of the person who's making these decisions. But again, you kind of have to assume that someone would have perfect knowledge, right, of the entirety of the reality, and you never do, and so. Again, a whole lot of things I realized in the process, but this utilitarian model is highly problematic for that reason, that someone gets to decide that person is essentially playing God. And then if you're some of the group that gets sacrificed, that doesn't work out very well for you, does it?
Let me ask you this. The Falun Gong, they were the primary targets initially for this. And, I've read some of the literature on the Falun Gong. Their basic principles are truth, compassion, forbearance. As a group, they look like, just frankly, a really harmless group of people. What was the obsession on the part of the Communist Party leadership about the Falun Gong, which turned them into the black class? and the reservoir for this organ harvesting. How did that happen? What is actually going on?
Well, so there's a bunch of different thoughts about this, right? The first one that I heard years ago was that there were by government estimate, it was 70 to 100 million practitioners of Falun Gong, you know, in a grassroots format. So by word of mouth, something grew in the span of 10 years or so to 70 to 100 million people. And it was bigger than the Communist Party membership, which I think was 60 million at the time. So that's one reason. Another reason I heard, which I didn't believe until I started working in Washington, D.C., by the way, is that it was just Jiang Zemin, the dictator at the time, was just very jealous, a very jealous man. And he was jealous because Li Hongzhi, the founder of Falun Gong, had the love of the people, of so many people, something he could never have, right? And I just thought, that's crazy. No one would make large sweeping decisions based on something like that, except since I've been in DC for a while, I've been kind of educated around this. So I actually think that was probably part of the reason. But the thing that I realized perhaps maybe 15 years in, it took me a while to kind of grasp this. See, Falun Gong is very unusual in its structure. It's unusually grassroots in a way that it's even hard for us in the West to understand. So there's voluminous teachings written by a man named Li Hongzhi, right, around, and actually another translation of the principles is to be true, good, and endure, right? But there's not a lot of rules. The rules would be something that every practitioner agrees on. So what are they? There's no collection of money for it. Okay, so you can't enrich yourself from being a practitioner. There's no hierarchy in it. So there's no kind of like in a religion, you might have a priest class or something. That doesn't exist. What makes you a practitioner is living the teachings. There's no roster. You don't join anything. You're not joining a group. If you live the teachings, you're a practitioner. If you don't live the teachings, you're not a practitioner, right? You know, there's other things like you're not supposed to change the teachings, but something particularly fascinating I found, and I think a lot of Falun Gong practitioners would agree on this, is that let's say, you know, Bob, you're really great at practicing being good, true, good, and enduring, right? Right. If I wanted to, I saw you and Bob, it's so amazing. I'm just going to copy Bob, right? But I can't do that. As a Falun Gong practitioner, I have to understand the teachings and find my own way to live that, right? So anyway, I thought about this. I was like, my goodness, this is like promotes an incredible amount of agency in people, which is like, you know, in a communist society, it's precisely what they don't want. Right? They don't want individual agency. So, you know, it just struck me like if you, and I don't know if everybody would agree with this, but if you were to design some sort of a way of thinking or an approach or a system that could resist totalitarianism and resist that desire of totalitarian states to control the mind, so to speak, it might look something like this, right? And I think that's actually probably the reason why they're so aggressively wanting to still, to this day, destroy Falun Gong.
Thank you very much. Let's take some questions from the audience. I'm quite sure there are folks who have. Yes. We're going to get you so we can hear. Yeah.
But I also worked in hospice care, and I lived in Taiwan and studied Tai Chi, still do. So I have all these ties, and I read Frank DeCotter's books that I recommend, which are chilling history of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But my question is, I'd like to have you address the common accusation of Falun Gong that it's a cult, and just kind of dismiss that completely for us, because you're going to hear it, and people think it too. It just pops in there, you know. Oh, they're taking their organs. Well, they are that cult. And I heard this recently from someone that I was telling this about, and I had to do my best. But I think you'll help me by doing it better than I could.
I mean, so doesn't this just sort of illustrate how powerful this, I mentioned at the beginning, right, that this dehumanization element is so central to being able to affect these kinds of persecutions, with even this extreme form of organ harvesting, right? Because like someone in their mind, you know, let's say someone was a member of a cult, would it be okay to harvest their organs? That's crazy, right? Like, it doesn't matter who you are, it shouldn't be okay, right, to kill you for organs. But somehow, because of this dehumanizing propaganda that this person has heard, somehow it's okay or something, right? You heard, you see what you said to me, right? So this is, I mean, the power of propaganda, frankly, you know, I'll say it. I didn't understand the power of propaganda until I saw what happened during COVID in this country, okay? People were led to believe all sorts of insanities, and it purely through mass power of messaging, right? And maybe I'm a little more immune to it than most people, but I mean, it was just shocking to me that can happen. I understood, my God, if you live in a totalitarian state where they literally control, you know, and fiercely, you know, act to destroy all independent information and sources of information. I know, you know, we know this very well at the Epoch Times, right? All our people were arrested very early on that were in there, got like 10-year prison sentences, and everything had to go underground. Anyway, propaganda works. It doesn't work for everybody, right? There's some group of people that don't, and I actually write about this too in the book a bit, that there's some people that are a bit resilient. But again, what's particularly interesting, if anything, to me, right, Falun Gong is sort of like an anti-cult or something like that, right? Because people will, I mean, there's no external means of control, right? Like that's something that would be typical in a cult, but it's almost like in this system, all those things have been actually specifically prevented from being there. I'm not saying that there isn't social pressure and things like that. We all, as human beings, right, we were subjected to these things. But if you were to design a system, it seems like all those methods, like money or you know, there's no. Another rule, by the way, is there's no worship. Also, right. So for people that feel like they need to worship a guru or something like that, you can't do that in Falun Gong, right? So. If anything, it's kind of the opposite, which is that there's an irony there, but it also shows the power of dehumanizing propaganda. And we should never allow that to actually be done, because it can lead to atrocity, as we've seen again and again in history.
Yeah. Let's have another question. Yes, yeah, back in the rear.
Hi. You'll hold it? Oh, thank you. Charles Weinberg, administrative law judge, retired. I went to China 1 month before my 70th birthday. I taught for 4 years. I had friends there that had gone through the cultural, what I call devolution, not revolution. They'd seen their parents beaten in the streets. I got a little homesick one time around Christmas. So I went to church, a very small church, probably half Western and half Chinese. And we did the night service, did all the songs, and when we came out of church, there were 200 policemen surrounding the church. I said to my friend, "Why are they here?" He said, "To protect me." I said, "No, they're here to intimidate me, to tell me don't come back here again." I saw a lot of churches in China, but while there, I also got aware of the one-child policy. I did some artwork with a friend of mine, which I really want to put on the mall here in DC. I'll show it to you if you want to see it. It's called The Chapel of the Lost Child. The one-child policy has destroyed China, has literally destroyed China.
If I may comment just briefly on that, a lot of people think that the one-child policy, right, was there purely, you know, in this Ehrlichian madness, right, population bomb, that we have to keep the population down and so forth. This is another thing that I, frankly, as I was writing this book, that just dawned on me. No, this was their, frankly, somewhat successful attempt to destroy the family. Okay, basically, again, the Chinese Communist Party, all communist systems, they seek the mind. They want either active or performative subservience to the system. Okay, and here you had, you know, one of the most powerful structural unit of humanity, the family, right? These generational families supporting each other, you know, since time immemorial, and, you know, like 9 children, 10 children, common, right? And then they instituted all sorts of wild policies through this one-child policy to basically break that system. And they weren't able to completely break the family, obviously, right? But they were able to destroy that whole structure quite effectively. And it's just one of the sort of pieces of the horror show that the Communist Party has been able to affect over its decades of rule.
Yes, we have time for one more question from the audience. Okay, keep it quick.
All right. So, long story short, I came back from China in 2020, and I lived in Vegas for 2 years. My son he was an alcoholic in Vegas. I tried to get him out. He died in June of fentanyl, and I think he's a kind of a victim of the Chinese. You know, the Chinese have this philosophy that because of the opium wars, they're going to get back at America. Fentanyl is actually a product of the Chinese, you know, distribution system. And I'm going to sue the hell out of them.
Okay.
No, and just super quick comment. I have a whole chapter dedicated to this concept of unrestricted warfare, where, you know, China provides the precursors, China provides the pill presses, China provides the financial backing for the cartels. It goes on and on and on, and is able to wipe away, you know, 30 to 40,000 military-aged males a year in America. It's a very powerful form of what unrestricted or unconventional warfare. We don't think of it as war, but they do.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, give Jan a hand. I'm happy to transfer this over to my good colleague, Jay Richards. Thank you very much, John. We'll have a great session.
Thank you. Well, the room is quiet, and I can understand why as it sinks in. So delighted to just briefly introduce the experts in our panel who will dive more deeply into this issue. So first is Congressman Chris Smith. Representative Smith represents New Jersey and is one of Congress's leading advocates for international human rights. He co-chairs the bipartisan Congressional Executive Commission on China and is the principal sponsor of the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act, which is repeatedly passed in the U.S. House. For decades, Congressman Smith has led hearings and legislation addressing China's persecution of religious and ethnic minorities and the regime's state-sponsored transplant abuse. Ethan Gutman is a senior research fellow in China Studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and co-founder of the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. He's an investigative journalist and author who's best known for The Slaughter, I believe about 20 years ago, and his new book out just last year, The Xinjiang Procedure, which documents forced organ harvesting and mass detention in China. He's testified before Congress and international bodies and has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Finally, Wesley J. Smith is chair and senior fellow of the Discovery Institute's Center on Human Exceptionalism. He's a lawyer, a philosopher, and a leading voice in bioethics. He's written extensively on medical ethics, human dignity, and abuses of biomedical power. That includes forced organ harvesting. He's the author of more than 14 books. He's a longtime contributor to National Review and a frequent legislative witness on bioethics and human rights. Please welcome our panelists to the stage.
Sure.
Yeah, we actually have those pictures, the little guide, so you know exactly where to sit. Still doesn't work, but
like a restaurant or something.
We're not great at following.
Shoot.
Well, this is a dark topic, and all of you have been studying and worked on it for years, and so I commend you for being able to do that. It's the sort of thing that I think most people probably spend a little time on and then would have to take a break. In fact, Representative Smith, you first raised concerns about forced organ harvesting from the Chinese Communist Party way back in 1998, when I assume it was even less cool to talk about these things than it is now, right? What's your sense of how the sort of scope and practice has developed or evolved from 98 to the present?
Sure.
No, you've got a lapel.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for the Heritage for shining a bright light on a absolutely Nazi-like process that's going on in a huge way in China, but in a lesser way, but not insignificant all over the world. China, that first hearing that I had in 96 and in 98, we had doctors come and testify, some from China. Harry Wu was there as well, the great human rights advocate. and bore witness to the killing of prisoners in such a way so as to procure their organs. They'd have the ambulances right there as they were executing these prisoners of conscience. And they were not to shoot to kill, they were shoot to put into a coma so that the organs could be extracted. And I have the actual one of the hearings we had in 1996. And, you know, and you just read it, it's chilling, but it was a smaller operation. Now it is industrial sized, and tens of thousands of young people, and I get this from Mr. Gutman, average age 28, are having their Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, others of faith, and it's made to order, just like the book. You know, in 2 weeks you can get a heart, you can get anything you possibly want. Our bill would make, I think, all the difference in the world, because it would say enough is enough. We're going to stop this Nazi-like practice. Joseph Mengele would have loved this, frankly. And we're going to say anyone who's part of that supply chain, you can get 20 years in prison and a $1 million penalty for what you're doing. So the brokers and the facilitators in New York, New Jersey, elsewhere, all over the world could find themselves the subject of prosecution here. And we also would impose a number of sanctions, like Magnitsky-like sanctions of going after the Chinese officials who never leave, but they wouldn't be able to do business here and they would never get a visa. So it's a horrific practice going on in plain sight when Putin and Xi Jinping were laughing about getting organs. This is what's at the core of that.
This is a hot mic incident.
It's a hot mic incident, you might recall.
Yeah.
And it's all about, you know, these. I was in the ICU 4 years ago. I'm fine now, doing great. As I laid there, believe it or not, what was I thinking about? Some poor Falun Gong practitioner or some Uyghur woman or man who's now being strapped down. They don't shoot him anymore. They strap him down, they put him under anesthesia, and they steal 2 to 6 of their organs for transplant somewhere else. They want the Uyghurs because they want Muslims. They want Muslim body parts to go to the Middle East, and they're making billions of dollars. And if I'm part of the Chinese Communist apparatchiks, if I'm a member of the Chinese Communist Party and I need something, if Xi Jinping tomorrow needs a liver, he goes to a Falun Gong practitioner or to a Uyghur to kill them to get those organs. It is horrific. This would also require the State Department to finally, and they have not done it, to do the kind of due diligence that they have to do to chronicle this horrible, horrible abuse.
Okay, I want to come back to some of the penalties, but I want to ask, Ethan, so, you know, if anyone Googles this will find, I think, maybe official government statements from something like 2015 claiming that, okay, well, they were doing something like this, but it's not happening any longer. I mean, how would you respond to that? Is this a live and active issue
Yeah, that's
today?
sort of the central question here, because that was the Chinese claim, and in fact, it was teed up by the, I think Jan was mentioning the Transplantation Society, and they kind of teed up that statement together to say, well, we're not really doing that. We're not harvesting prisoners anymore. They didn't even talk about Falun Gong or Uyghurs or anything like that. It was just prisoners, and we were allowed to imagine that included Falun Gong, for example. And of course it didn't. And the other thing of the sort of amazing sleight of hand that took place there was that they basically were just restating what they'd already done in 2007. Back in 2006, Kilgore and Matus came out with a report called Bloody Harvest. It was a seminal report. It was very important. It was very legalistic, but it basically went through the existing evidence that a lot of Falun Gong practitioners had worked up that this organ harvesting was taking place. But so the next year, the Chinese said, you know what? From now on, anybody as a prisoner can donate their organs, and they just need to sign this form. It's a very clear form. And so they did that, and so they were basically announcing the same exact thing. Because in the English press, they said, that's it, we're not harvesting prisoners anymore. In the Chinese press, Huang Jiefu, who was the master of ceremonies for the Chinese at the time, said, you know what? These people, these prisoners, they are Chinese citizens, and they have every right to donate their organs for the good of the state. And so that's what basically we were looking at the status quo, just wrapped in a new ribbon. And then something started to break. One point was, of course, you and Rohrbacher held that hearing where the head of the Transplantation Society confessed that he had no ability whatsoever to explain what was going on in Chinese transplant hospitals, particularly military hospitals. They had no access to them whatsoever. And it was an amazing hearing because he basically threw the entire TTS under the bus so that he would not be guilty of anything.
Yeah.
A phenomenal, I'll never forget it. I thought it was one of the great moments. The other thing that started happening was this massive construction of the camps in Xinjiang. And that was accompanied by these massive health checks. Every single Uyghur, as long as they were over the age of 12, had to get these health checks. And the health checks specifically were blood tests, and specifically were used with DNA kits. So the combination of DNA plus blood is what gives you tissue typing, the best cross-matching. It makes the ability that Jan was talking about to get the perfect organ for the right person. And this was happening, and no Chinese. Half of Xinjiang is Han Chinese. None of them had to do any of this, okay? None of them had to do a single exam. No one that I've interviewed, and I've interviewed a lot of Uyghurs on this question, and Kazakhs too, none of them were brought back and they said, you know what, your blood pressure's a little high.
Right.
You know, we gotta check this out. They didn't do any of that. So I'm answering this question too long. Yeah. So I can come back and now I give you numbers if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's come back to that. But just for people, so on the map, Xinjiang, so we're talking Western China. Where exactly? So that people have a sense of where
northwest China. It's the big, it's dominated by something called the Tarim Desert, which is this phenomenal, it's like this, a mini Sahara. Yeah. Not that many. It happens that it's also the region of China that contains all of China's energy resources for this century. Okay. So it's extremely important.
And this is where the Uyghurs, and then you said some Kazakhs that are primarily concentrated in that province.
That's right. And the Uyghurs outnumber the Kazakhs by about 3 to 1. Okay. But the Kazakhs got brought into this into the camps as well. Okay. So.
Well, so Wesley, they talked to, Jan mentioned utilitarian bioethics, but I mean, in some ways I sort of hesitate to analyze the obvious. I mean, it's like, okay, it's wrong to torture small children for the fun of it. Do we need bioethics, right? We sort of know this intuitively, and I think everyone listening or watching knows intuitively that there's something really diabolical here. But talk about just the kind of basic bioethical principles that would be involved in being violated by this practice.
Well, yeah, I mean, what should be in bioethical practice is the equal intrinsic dignity of every human being, regardless of their status in terms of capacities, regardless of their belief systems and so forth. If you do away with that kind of approach, you're going to create people who you believe it is good to exploit and oppress. What's happening in China is, to me, Fourth Reich stuff. The evil is so profound that I think a lot of people turn away from it, don't believe it. And I think there are other people who are so invested in making money from China or so intimidated by Chinese practices of oppression and coercion that the response internationally has been very muted. And the response in the medical community has been muted. And the response in the bioethics community has been muted. And I do want to say, this is about what's happening in China. Let's call that a 108-degree fever. But what's happening in the West along similar lines is a 102-degree fever. So you have bioethicists in the most notable medical and bioethical journals arguing that where euthanasia is legal, euthanasia should be done by organ harvesting. And we're beginning to turn people, let's say, who are suicidal and qualify to be killed with a lethal jab or receive a lethal prescription into a killable caste. And once you create a killable caste, you begin to instrumentalize people. And just one quick story out of Belgium. There was a poor young woman, a teenager, 16, 17, with brain cancer. She decided to be euthanized at a particular time because she wanted to have her organs harvested. No suicide prevention. She was put into a 36-hour coma, which wasn't for her benefit. It was to test her organs and find suitable donors. And when that process was complete, she was euthanized and harvested, and the media was just applauding. One of the reasons she wanted to die at that particular time was the organ donation. Now, this wasn't being grabbed, thrown in prison, tissue typed, and killed, but it was still an instrumentalizing of her because her death didn't matter. What mattered after she decided she wanted to die were her organs.
Yeah. And I think it's a crucial point because, of course, Americans and Westerners generally say, well, okay, obviously forced organ harvesting, that's bad, but what's the big deal if we sort of do this and there's consent? But I think the key point you made at the beginning, this is the fundamental moral principle, and it's this question of intrinsic goods and intrinsic evils, that if everyone has an intrinsic dignity simply by virtue of being human, there are certain things that we have to do and certain things that ought not be done. The most extreme version of utilitarianism says, well, there's nothing like that. What there are these kind of calculations about the public good, which, of course, as Jan said, is sort of open to everyone. But that's the kind of crucial thing. And the thing honestly, I mean, for 25 years, this has been, if there's a single theme of your work, has been this basic idea of human exceptionalism, as you call it.
Yeah, well, and the problem becomes if we begin to think that we can get a benefit from suicidal people.
Right.
And in Canada, they have conjoined harvesting and euthanasia. In Ontario, if you go to a doctor and say, I want to be killed, and in Canada it's a lethal jab, the doctor contacts the organ procurement organization, which then calls the patient and says, can we have your liver? I mean, there is no suicide prevention for these people.
No.
So we have decided, once you decide to die, autonomy, choice, then suddenly you become less, in a sense, than human. What matters more are what we can get from you. And that's a real and acute danger in the West. We're not 108-degree fever, but I think we're getting to 102.
Wow. So, Representative Smith, so as I mentioned in the introduction, and as you mentioned, you have had this bill that's passed the House twice. And so we've gotten a sense, we know what's sort of happening in China. We've gotten that described, but as you hinted previously, there's also a domestic market for this. And of course, we can't sort of pass criminal laws against sort of people that are inside China, but we can, of course, do that for the U.S. Let's talk a bit about the sort of domestic market, because it sounds like there are Americans have to be participating in this to some degree.
There's no doubt Americans are participating. Brokers are able to match people up, and as was said earlier by Jan, in 2 weeks you need a heart, you need this. That doesn't happen in the real world unless you're killing somebody in order to procure that organ. What our bill will do, it would make it so that if you are part of that scheme, recipient, broker, part of that supply chain, which is absolutely tainted with this heinous practice, you get up to 20 years in prison. And I'm the author of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and that took 3 years to get passed. All kinds of pushback, and we have real penalties. This is the parallel to all of that, because people are being killed for what they have inside their body, and that is their organs. Anywhere in the world where we can reach that person, we can prosecute. So the prosecutors, the U.S. attorneys, would have more workload, but necessarily it might have a chilling effect. But people would say, wait a minute, where am I getting that organ? I don't want to be I don't want to go to prison once I get the liver. Right. And then it would sanction people inside of China. And I think you go right to the top. Xi Jinping is up to here with complicity. He's pushing this, especially as a genocide against the Falun Gong and a genocide against the Uyghurs. And this is the guy who said in 2000, right as the Olympics were being agreed to go to him, and I've offered legislation on the Uyghurs as well, and he says, show no mercy. That is the buzzword for Xi Jinping. They show absolutely no mercy for these men and women, and I've gotten from Ethan Gutman that is pretty much equally divided between male and female, and we're talking tens of thousands of kids. To me, a 28-year-old is a kid, a young person, who is having their organs taken from them. And again, they know it, but they can't get out of the gurney. They can't get out of because they're strapped down as they're having these organs. This was going on in 94, 95. My hearing in 1996 chronicled a lot of it, but it was this big compared to what it is now. So this atrocity, we're asking, the bill passed 406 to 1. 406 to 1. And it was blocked by Bob Menendez, who was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. I have appealed to Senator Risch, a meeting with him on the 15th of this month of April, to please just, you see the bill, get it down to the president, and let's start really going after all of these players around the world. But China is like the quintessential example of this exploitation.
So, Ethan, give us your sense of what are the numbers that we're looking at, and also how do you derive the numbers?
I just wanted to mention one thing. You got it a little wrong. It didn't come out last year, the book. It's an advanced reader copy to satisfy a few people. Came out. It actually came out, I think, 3 days before Jan's book. I mean, in our race to the channel. And that means that I'm coming out of the writing cave here. Yeah. And so I'm going to stick to my notes here because, and
you look fine having been in the cave.
Well, okay. Orwell said that finishing a book was like coming out of a long illness. Look, the transplant volume of China was reliably estimated by Kilgore Matus and myself at 60,000 transplants per year minimum, back in 2016. Since 2017, the indications are that Xinjiang has become the new epicenter. And so we're looking at the exploitations of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, maybe a few Hui, very few. I found almost no evidence of the Hui. They're also Muslims, but they speak Chinese, they look Chinese, so they're not really targeted the same way. The majority of the victims are Uyghurs, and are on average 28 to 29 years old. There's some dispute about whether it's 28 or 29. These are the kind of issues we get into. Falun Gong harvesting continues. Beijing's rate of Uyghur Kazakh selection in the camps for organ harvesting, and I can say this, and I will absolutely, you can read my book and you can dispute the numbers if you like, but it's all there and it's very transparent. It is 25,000 to 50,000 per year, assuming 1 million in the camps. And I assume that there's actually a little bit more than 1 million in the camps, even now. With 2 to 3 organs successfully extracted and transplanted from each individual, we can easily get to the low estimate of 25,000 is capable of fully meeting China's transplants industry requirements. I came up with these estimates. Back then, in 2016, you could do some of this remotely. You could sit there at the computer, you could hack into Chinese systems. Chinese transplant hospitals were competing for the title of #1 kidney transplant, #1 lung transplant, and so forth. They love to brag about this stuff. That age is over. We are now looking at it. China as the transplant system is a black box. And so there was only one way to do this. There was one group, not the Uyghurs, that was given, and Falun Gong, we're not getting many Falun Gong coming out of China anymore. The Kazakhs, because they border on China, they have some guanxi, they have some connections, they have some ability to bribe their way out occasionally. So they get out of the camp, maybe after spending a couple of years. So the only way to do this was to go to Kazakhstan and interviewing these refugees. Now, these are refugees that are not really motivated to talk about this. To them, they're sort of accidental in this whole process. But I went into Kazakhstan. We got in without being recognized. And then we did these interviews in a very safe place in Almaty. And it was all the witnesses were from different camps. And I only asked them about things that they had seen firsthand. I'm not interested in their overall impression of how many people are being harvested or anything like that. And a lot of them didn't even accept that people were being harvested. But they did describe disappearances, always at age 28. Every time it would come out, 28, 29, 30, right around in there. One case, the woman, Kazakh woman, nomad, grew up in a nomad family. She used to snuggle with another spoon with another woman to keep warm at night. It was terribly cold in these places. She only noticed that the woman was gone because the bed had gone cold. The next day, her toothbrush was still there. By noon, it was gone. This is she was 28.
So what is it about 28 specifically?
This is when your organs, you have reached maturity, and yet you haven't started to deteriorate. It's kind of like your brain, actually, to some extent. These are also, you know, you were saying they're kids, but in a way, these are the ultimate activists, okay? You look at Uyghur activists, 28 is when you're at the peak of you're starting to gain some wisdom and you're at the peak of health. But for organ harvesting, it's very, very successful, the results. And China has made a cult out of getting successful results from their transplants. They're very good at it. I would just say one more thing. So we're talking about 2.5% to 5% disappearances within that group in any given year. And it's absolutely strikingly consistent. Okay, now it's also true that there were some people who said, I didn't notice any disappearances at all. And I kept them in the study because a study is a study, a deal is a deal. But, you know, I don't know another way to estimate these numbers.
Yeah.
I could not figure out another way. And I do believe that field research is often undervalued in this area.
Wow. So Wesley, you have been writing about this and related topics for a long time at National Review and elsewhere, but say a bit about the media response on this. I mean, my sense is that there's not a sort of massive media campaign on this.
You know, I wanted to thank Representative Smith and Ethan and Jan for the work they're doing. I'm not doing that research. I see what they do and then I write about it and try to publicize it, which is a lot easier than doing the actual effort. I mean, I think these gentlemen really deserve a round of applause because they're standing up for human rights. I think the media has been shamefully absent without leave, and it occurs to me when I was thinking of coming here today that too many in the media don't care as much about what is done as who does it. So there are certain groups that they will look at as anything they do, they'll pounce. And there are other groups that, or countries that they'll be very muted in their response. I think a good illustration of the, I think, corruption of the media, and I think China has corrupted the media. I think it has its tentacles in very many American institutions. But there was a book that was published, I think it was in 2009, called Larry's Kidney, by Daryl Asa Rose. And Larry's Kidney is about Rose going to China with his cousin Larry, who needed a kidney, buying a kidney, and you know the adventures they had in China. And the New York Times and the Washington Post did book reviews calling it a comedic tour de force.
Oh my.
Well, that sound you heard was my head exploding. Because you were talking about someone who was murdered to give Larry a kidney, and the media couldn't even grasp that point. And so I bring this book up every chance I get because I just think it's a form of evil. Not that it is complicity in such an evil system. And all of us are going to, at some point, perhaps face a circumstance where we're in a very tragic situation. There are some things worse than death. And it seems to me having somebody killed so you might get an extra 10 years is one of those.
Well, so why? This is what I don't get. It's not like this is a partisan issue. I can't imagine that if you work for the New York Times or the New Yorker that you think sort of killing Uyghurs to harvest their organs is no big deal. What's happening? Is there cognitive dissonance? Is it, well, this is maybe a myth or it's not pervasive? I don't get this.
Well, this is my supposition. But one, it's very hard to get your mind around, as we've discussed. This is such a profound evil that we think, well, that can't happen in this day and age. And two, you have the very people who might scream and yell about Gaza don't say a word about China. So that's what I talked about. It's not what is done so much as who does it. I think the media has certain countries and populations that they deem the enemy and others that they don't care as much about. And again, a lot of money is made out of China. You think about Apple and Nike and the large corporations that actually some of them have been accused, I think credibly, of using slave labor. And there's too much to lose if China is shunned as it should be. Plus, China is a very powerful country, and I think people don't want to have that kind of confrontation that might result because they care very much about face and being respected and so forth.
So, Representative Smith, I kind of am wondering the same question with you. I mean, I know, of course, the House is very narrowly divided between the Republicans and the Democrats. I think one major piece of legislation has passed and been signed by President, I think it was last July, so we're sort of stalling. But this one seems like a no-brainer to me. I'm assuming I'm assuming the organ harvesters don't have a powerful lobby in town that's meeting with everyone. So why would a bill like this not just pass through, given the fact that it was virtually a unanimous vote in the House?
Well, I think one of the things, having chaired so many hearings on it, we do, and again, Jan, Ethan, they have provided, I mean, you testified, 3 times at our hearings? We have very expert testimony that is not refutable by the usual suspects, and that's the major media, which looks askance every time you talk about human rights in China. Even when the Olympics were coming around, I mean, corporate America was absolutely complicit in not wanting to raise human rights because they didn't want to lose their access for their product. That's got to end. I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal and actually at a press conference in May 26, 1994, when Bill Clinton delinked human rights from trade, and that's when we lost China on trade and human rights especially. They said all they care about is the bottom line. They don't care about human rights. It's a little asterisk somewhere. And many of our presidents have always felt if you just trade more, they will somehow matriculate from a dictatorship to a democracy, and that doesn't happen. They get worse. And when it comes to this issue, it has gone on. It has grown exponentially, and you got all these people. I mean, they've killed so many Falun Gong practitioners, which is outrageous. And now they're killing the Uyghurs too, and others, in order to get their organs. I've asked, and I've appealed again to the Senate leadership, bring it up under a UC. I believe it will pass, and whoever blocks it, I can tell you we'll be doing press conferences pointing out that person. I'm meeting with the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee on April 15th. It's taken me about a year to get the meeting, asking him, please put the bill up, or at least you see it. Don't block it. And we start this. We had the same pushback on the human trafficking legislation back in the year 2000. So it's like deja vu all over again. Who cares about? Well, we care, and all of you care. These guys are just unbelievable, as are you, in caring. So we got to, empathize with the oppressed and stand up to the oppressor. And, Xi Jinping is getting away with murder in plain sight on a myriad of fronts. I mean, use of torture is pervasive there. If you're arrested, you're going to be tortured. And you're going to cough up things because, who can withstand some of the hideous methods that they use to torture people? Well, this is now something that is larger than I could have ever thought. Again, 1996, I had a doctor talking about, from China, 1996, 30 years ago, about how the kidneys, you need a kidney? Yeah. We can arrange that, and he says it was unbelievable how easy it was. And the complicity on the universities. Stephen Mosher, we all remember him. One child per couple policy was brought up before. I've been working on that since 1979, when it first went into effect. Another hideous practice. They're missing tens of millions of girls. The girl child who was killed simply because of you're only allowed one. I say that because Stanford wouldn't give Stephen Mosher his doctorate because he broke the story. So they want access, and the access issue, whether it be corporate America or there are university types, is so profound. It's like, we'll look the other way on these human rights issues every day of the week, and maybe we'll make a difference, and they kid themselves that somehow they're a mitigating factor. They're anything but. NYU, they get a campus in Shanghai. I had a hearing on it. I had the chancellor come. I invited myself, and I did go over there and speak on human rights, but it was like, what are you doing? This is a dictatorship. We love the Chinese people. We hate their government. They deserve better than what they have, and it will continue forever so long as we enable it. And this is another gross manifestation of human rights abuse going on right as we talk.
Yeah. So, Ethan, you earlier mentioned this transplant organization. I think that was the one that in 2015 claimed this was no longer going on. But, I mean, who are the American vested interests? I don't want you to sort of speculate or, commit libel, but just it's a little difficult to get your head around. Okay, what depraved, non-evil people could there possibly be that are somehow complicit in this?
Well, the last guy who sued me for libel, sued me 3 times. Dr. Cohen J is now just 2 weeks ago was announced 17-year prison sentence. So wow. I don't.
So you're good.
I don't suggest anyone goes on that tack with me. But here's the point. I think there is some really very good news, which is the press didn't notice, but that's the press. The International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation did a 180 on this whole issue. These are the heart and lung transplant doctors. They don't do livers and kidneys, you know, okay? And they came out in 2023 and announced an academic boycott of China. Now, a lot of that was Jacob Levy's work behind the scenes, Jacob Levy of Israel at the Sheba Heart Center. And, but they stuck with it. They even invited me to give a keynote address, which was like, you know, inviting a velociraptor into their conference. I mean, it was just absurd. But the point is that they've stuck with it because they say there's no evidence that they've turned, that China's reformed in any way. Now, that may seem a small thing. Okay, all it means is that, you know, Chinese transplant surgeons can't come to their conferences, they can't write for their journals, and so forth. That's a huge deal in China. That is a massive loss of face. Now, you have to consider what China wants. China always, the money was never supposed to be made medically by transplants. It was supposed to be made in pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals was the pillar industry, the growth industry, because they could do it faster than we could. They could put together a, you know, an FDA program that would, you know, drugs would magically appear, okay? Well, that didn't work out very well during COVID, did it? So, so in a sense, they're victims of their own, they're victims of several things. The fact is there's a tremendous amount of profits for them in this. It's been estimated, I've estimated 9 billion. That's a back of the napkin kind of estimate, but it's, I think.
9 billion for the sort of.
Yeah, 9 billion per year, but I mean, it's a back of the, it's very hard to know this for sure. I think Jan estimated 8.9 billion, but the point is that those profits are there, and there's the desire to kill enemies of the state, and they can chew gum and walk at the same time. I mean, there's nonsense about you have to choose one. No, China always does things that are profitable and ideological simultaneously. That's the magic CCP combination. But the real problem here, I suspect, is it's the cover-up. Every one of these people who's been in these camps has seen things that they shouldn't have. Maybe some of them don't. Four of the people that I interviewed didn't see anything, okay? Or didn't want to see anything, or were too drugged up to see something. But most people have seen something. The doctors, they've got a very high suicide rate among transplant doctors. They're always jumping out of windows. Now, I had somebody from Epoch Times call me and say, you know, Ethan, isn't it wonderful that at the end of their lives they suddenly have this change of heart? And I'm like, they were pushed, okay? Right, but we don't know that for a fact. Again, we're not there with a clipboard, but we can see something's going on. And this is something that was true even with the Falun Gong persecution. I interviewed a minister. He never would give me his name, but I interviewed him in Australia. And he said that really Jiang Zemin attacked Falun Gong because it was an attempt to wipe out Tiananmen. Tiananmen just wouldn't leave the Chinese psyche. So you have to move on to a new enemy, a new problem, right? And then that did sort of resolve Tiananmen within China. So, I mean, I don't want to go too out there on this, but I'm saying that this is the biggest thing holding them back. And to me, what's going on right now is we have an opening, a tremendous opening, because the old excuse used to be, both in the world of the press and within politics too, was, you know, well, the doctors aren't really signed on to this. Well, now you can say it's a split. There's a schism, okay? There's a real schism between the heart and lung transplant surgeons and the Transplantation Society. That's an opening. That's an opening that could be filled by Congressman's bill right there. And that is, we should take this opening. But to do this, we are only doing the minimum. You're perfectly aware of what the World Psychiatric Association did when they discovered that the Soviet Union was putting their dissidents into mental hospitals. They stood up and they denounced it. They denounced it very clearly. I know this because both my parents were psychiatrists, unfortunately. And you know, that
explains a lot.
Yeah, explains something, I think. Saying I had a dream in my house was very different. Okay. Listen, so they basically told me about this. I was very aware of it as a child, that they'd taken this stance. Now, it didn't stop the Soviet Union, and didn't even stop Russia today. Just 2 weeks ago, I read about this in the papers. They put a dissident into a mental hospital. but it kept it from spreading. This is a virus, okay? It's always been a virus that will go to country after country.
Yes.
We started to see it. ISIS was doing it for a little while, okay? We've seen it. It's obviously spreading into our, our ideas about assisted suicide. I mean, that's the problem here.
Yeah.
And so if we can stop it in China, if we can at least stop the normalization, I think that would be the first step. The second step is another thing.
So Wesley, put your lawyer hat on here, and we spent a lot of time talking about the supply side of this. I won't. No, that's you just wear the hat temporarily for this question. But we talked a lot about the supply, but of course there's also the purchasers, or those who demand this, and it's not hard to imagine. Okay, if I'm a billionaire, let's say my net worth is $3 billion, and I have absolutely no sort of immoral standards at all, that there would be a massive demand and a very high price for that. So legally, I mean, how would countries, let's just say the United States, not even the West, but should the United States handle those who are purchasing these things, assuming they're in the country?
I think it should be handled the same way we handle consumers of children's sexuality in Thailand or places like that, where you make it against the law to do that. I would say you wouldn't let them have immune suppressant drugs, but that would be a death penalty, so you can't do that. But I think you can expose them, shun them, punish them criminally, and put them, if necessary, in a registry, because they are complicit, and perhaps you might even call co-conspirators in the murder of people. These people wouldn't be murdered if they weren't coming to China with $100,000 for an organ. And I also think that the medical societies, I was really happy about the heart-lung people, but there should be less collaboration in China and the U.S. We shouldn't be allowing the Chinese doctors to come here and be treated with respect who are engaged in this kind of activity. I think we should, China is the place where ethics goes to die in terms of medical research. We need to curtail that kind of collaboration, which they yearn for because they want respect. And we need to, as long as this is going on, and as long as they're willing to tolerate it within their society and benefit from it, we need to treat China, I think, as a pariah nation in the sense of those kinds of soft power issues.
Well, so you mentioned something I want to just follow up, but the organ rejection medicine. So assume a wealthy American is able to, on the black market, not dealing with any Americans, procure the organ, go to China, receive it, and come back. There's going to have to be ongoing domestic medical care, right? I think that's not that hard to track.
Yeah, exactly.
If there was interest in doing so.
You can't refuse it because that's a death penalty, but that will allow you to track it, and that's a very good point.
Ethan, did you want to say it again?
In Taiwan, I mean, when the Dr. Ke scandal, the mayor of Taipei, when that scandal emerged, the medical societies came out and said, we can't continue to give immunosuppressive drugs or the discount that we're giving, massive discount, for patients who've gone to China and gotten an organ. Now, I don't know if they ever really, again, not there with the clipboard. I don't really know if they actually instituted that. But the threat alone was phenomenal and actually changed Taiwanese society, I think, on this issue.
Representative Smith, so you mentioned NYU specifically, but say a little bit more about, I mean, those of us who lived through COVID realize how public health institutions can be deeply compromised by this sort of remarkable collaboration between China and the United States. But talk about, I mean, other vested interests domestically. I assume other universities and research entities.
Have been complicit or turned a blind eye. That's the problem. And again, they want access, they want grants, they want money, and it becomes self-interest above the interests of some victim who's going to die a horrible death. So that's been a major problem. I've chaired, Marco Rubio and I co-chaired the China Commission for a long time. So many hearings on the problem of this collaboration of our academic people. I meet with them and they pretty much tell me, you're all wet, you don't know what's going on. And it's like, well, we know from, again, the people like Jan and from Ethan, and the tremendous research that they have done, that there's a reality there that you are choosing to ignore. I remember with NYU, I asked them, you know, they talked about the students that they have access to the internet. I said, okay, if you put in Tiananmen Square, do you get what Google did? I had a big hearing in 2005 that showed how Google was completely manufacturing what you see. No Tiananmen Square, you see beautiful pictures of Tiananmen Square, no tanks, no bayonets, no nothing. It never happened, because they claim it never happened, the Tiananmen Square massacre. When Xu Tian came here, who was the butcher of Beijing, he's the guy that ordered the tanks in. He was received by Bill Clinton, got a 19-gun salute at the White House. So I put together a hearing in 2 days. All these people testified, including a People's Liberation, People's Daily editor who went to jail for what he tried to say. And he said, no one died in Tiananmen Square. Are you kidding me? It was on, you know, TV.
We watched it.
And it continued after Tiananmen Square when they hunted people down. So this ability to accept a gross falsehood, you know, this propaganda, and it happens all the time. Almost like the garbage about the Falun Gong being a cult. They're amazing people, you know, spiritual, kind, gentle, benevolent. What are you saying?
No,
I wish we had more people who would just, you know, love their neighbor like that. So it's really a, and it's ever present, you know? The fact that they're blocking this bill, whoever it is, you know, in the Senate, and it was Menendez last time, we knew that for a fact, and now he's in jail. But Menendez blocked it, and I said, Bob, and his staff, what are you doing? You know, these are wonderful people who are being slaughtered for their organs, and we can stop some of it by going after the supply chain. Again, when we start imposing sanctions on individuals in China, all of a sudden they'll stand up and take notice. They won't be able to go over here and buy and sell and do all kinds of other things, you know, transact. Property will be malaffected by it through the sanctions, and they won't get a visa anyway. But again, we'll go after even the purchaser if they knowingly procure that organ. Obviously, in criminal law, you need the word knowingly, and that's in our bill. And it's the whole world. You know, we say, and there's no doubt about it, forced organ harvesting is a global, heinous practice, but nowhere even comes close than China.
Just real quick, we also have to shorten the waiting periods for organs and do that ethically. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to do it unethically, like doing away with the dead donor rule. But there are ethical means to do it. One of the really hopeful approaches now is xenotransplantation, where they're actually genetically altering pigs so that their organs, which are pretty close to ours, can be used in transplants. And there was a woman who received, I believe it was a kidney, and lasted a long time in an experiment. So we need to continue to stop the demand side, and the demand side is caused by the long waiting periods. And we should all support ethical, again, focusing on that research. And I wanted to point out that Dick Cheney, Vice President of the United States, one of the most powerful people in the country at the time, waited his turn, like everyone else, for a heart transplant. That has to be honored more. I didn't see any media saying, oh, Dick did the right thing, because he was reviled by many people until Trump came along, I guess. But that's important. That was real leadership, where he did it in the ethical and appropriate way.
So Ethan, just briefly, the one sort of purchasers that we haven't said much about would be the Chinese Communist Party elites. I'm guessing that, I mean, this, you know, I'm just sort of discerning this from first principles, that they would get first dibs. That's obviously right. And I assume we have some information on that. Of course, we had the hot mic incident, which, you know, people have talked about.
The very first, I think the hot mic incident is just a sign of a growing confidence that we can get away with anything. Look at this. All we have to do is shift things over to the northwest of China, and then suddenly all the heat's off again. But you know, back in the day, the first knowledge that we have of live organ harvesting being tried out for the first time occurs in about 1994. And then in 1995, we have several witnesses on this, including a participant, somebody who actually cut open a human being and took out their kidneys and liver. That's Dr. Enver Totti. He's testified on this in many places. But it was after that, after the Gulja incident, that they started, so that's in 1997, that you have the first cases, and I know because I interviewed a doctor who was involved in this, Uyghur doctor. 5 high-ranking Chinese Communist Party cadres came flying into Urumqi, and they'd rounded up a lot of Uyghurs at the time. And they said, go in and take blood tests from the political prisoners, not the regular prisoners, the political prisoners. And there was nearly a riot. You know, what's interesting is that there's the denial capacity of the Uyghurs was very low somehow. They said, how can you do this? You're a Uyghur like me. How can you do this? He said, it's just for your health. It's just for your health, he kept saying. And of course, it wasn't for their health. It was so that they could get kidneys. And the 5 departed after a while. And then after a month or two, another 5 high-ranking Chinese Communist Party cadres came in and got them again. And it could have all ended there. That's the point. The point is, okay, China experiments, Xinjiang's its secret laboratory, but instead Falun Gong came online in 1999, and that was just too irresistible. You had these extremely healthy people, okay? That's the way they were described to Dr. Mayor Ke, who was out there trying to elicit organs for his patients. They said, look, we know you're concerned about these organs coming from criminals, that you're concerned about hepatitis, you're concerned about all the attendant drug abuse problems that come with these people. They've had rough lives. Don't worry. All your patients will receive organs from Falun Gong. These people are very healthy. They don't drink, they don't smoke, they do this very healthy Qigong, okay? And so your patients are going to be healthy too.
Wow. Well, I've got a bunch more questions, but let's, in the next few minutes, let's take questions. Actually, if we have some online questions, let's start with online questions. Is someone tending those? No? Okay, let's do it. Yeah, so, okay, so Jan gets first dibs here. So no pontificating, only questions, please.
I just want to add a little bit of information to the mix and a question, sure. Okay? So one of them is there's some amazing new technologies that are coming online. One is called GenBank, and it's a perfusion machine. It's basically a box that'll keep a kidney perfectly perfused at room temperature for 2 days, okay? And this is, the FDA is kind of supporting this. This is amazing technology, which will help in getting kidneys into people. 2 days is a huge amount of time to facilitate that. The other side of that knife's edge is that now you could have organs of indeterminate origin shipped out of China if they get a handle on this technology, right? So just something to think about as we're thinking about legislative solutions and so forth. Another approach has been in the states. There's 6 states that have passed legislation that just says Medicare, Medicaid, insurance can't pay for transplants in China. There's another bill called the Block Act, Congressman Dunn. I think it's still in committee. It hasn't gotten out of the House yet, but I imagine it would be passed. There's a second bill in the lines of the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act, but just focused explicitly on China. It's called the Falun Gong and Victims of Forced Organ Harvesting Act. Now it's got a Senate campaign. The point is there's a lot of interest in this, and I think all of this legislation should and can pass now, and no one is, if it gets to the floor, as you said, Congressman, I think nobody's voting against this. It would be kind of hard to imagine, right? Because it's just a no-brainer legislation. So it's just a question of getting these bills to the floor in the Senate ultimately. Yeah.
It would also be nice if President Trump would make a big statement about this.
Yeah.
About legislation, okay, I kind of theorize in the book about this. There's something called the Wolf Amendment, which kind of saved the American space industry by it basically says that if you're getting money from the US government for space, you can't participate with the Chinese space industry. It's kind of, Greg Autry put me onto this kind of unbelievable bill. But it just struck me one day, wouldn't that be an amazing piece of legislation around transplantation in China? Just really straightforward. And I think it would cut a lot of complicity at all sorts of levels. That's an idea. I don't write legislation, so yeah.
Yeah, thoughts?
Well, it's all good.
You're the legislator.
Here's part of the problem. And I've been in Congress 46 years. I've had more of my bills go over to the House, over to the Senate after passing overwhelmingly in the House. 406-1 is what the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act got. Totally bipartisan. And then it goes nowhere. There's a threat of a filibuster or somebody in committee puts a hold on it. So it's not just a problem for this bill or bills like it, it's a problem for legislation across the board. The Senate, and that's why I'm appealing to the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who's a very good man. Please, just empathize with these people enough to say, let's get this bill on the floor. And Trump will sign it. I have no doubt about it. We've talked to all of his people. They all get it, and it would be nice if he would speak out boldly about it. If he meets with Xi Jinping, he should talk about this. When the bill passed, the Chinese embassy here in Washington said, oh, big lie, big lie. And they also said, almost at the same time, anyone who wants to go to Xinjiang can go. I wrote a letter immediately and said, I want to lead a congressional delegation to Xinjiang. All of a sudden, and we keep writing him, we keep calling him, nothing. You know, I want to go there.
All the hotels are just
filled.
The hotels,
they're just filled. But it shows you, the cover up, and they push back, they do it aggressively, but they're bullies. They're especially bullies with victims. And whether it be torture or forced organ harvesting, executions, which are horrific there, the crackdown on the church, the synthesization of all faiths, including the Christian faith, what they do in Tibet. I mean, everywhere you look, it is repression on steroids. And what we need to do on this one and say, at least we can go after those who are procuring those organs. And that means the brokers get focused upon too. You know, this doesn't happen, it's very hard to make this connection if you don't have somebody walking you through it. And how much, Ethan, does one transplant procure for that doctor or for the Chinese Communist Party? Huge amounts of money, and again, there's nowhere you could get a heart except unless you're very, very lucky in 2 weeks. Doesn't happen unless you kill somebody to get it.
So down here on the front, wait for the mic, just right here. No, all the way down. Yeah, right here.
Thank you. My name is Johannes Mazgaba. Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Johannes Mazgaba from Ethiopia. I'm special envoy for the African Union diaspora programs. African Union diaspora programs, special envoy intergovernmental relations. My question is, I think you've asked a very good question, why it's not really getting a bipartisan and media is not covering it. My question is, even though in our global community there is so much that divides us, but there are also agendas that can unite us. In my humble opinion, I think this is one of the agendas that can unite the global community to speak in one voice. Yeah. So my question to especially Congressman Smith, I know him from Ethiopia, he's visited my country. What is happening to actually even bring this to the attention of to the United Nations system, the African Union system, the European Union, so that this all regional blocks, you talked about Foreign Relations Committee, this is a wonderful opportunity. And also he talked about how this is becoming a virus expanding globally. You all talked about how this is industrialized, but for me it is internationalized. It
does. So, Representative Smith, speak to that. I mean, there's an international human rights apparatus, there are organizations. This seems like it should be low-hanging fruit. Now, I'm thinking maybe one member of the Security Council might not be interested in it, but I mean, there's a lot of other countries.
Well, again, talking about pushback, Tedros is the Director General of the WHO. He got his job from Xi Jinping. They lobbied for him, they got the job, it was renewed under their sponsorship. He covered up the COVID-19 with impunity, saying, oh, it's not transferable, came from a wet lab, and all the other things that they parroted pursuant to what the Chinese Communist Party wanted them to say. And he has been nowhere to be found on this issue, as far as I can tell, and a whole lot of other human rights issues. And he's the Director General of the WHO. The WHO should be walking point on this issue, and they're not, because his benefactor would be incensed over that. So there's those kinds of, I mean, where is the UN on all this? Maybe there's somebody up there that has a concern, but this ought to be and it's global. The other bill that was mentioned, John, that just covers China. China is the most egregious example, but we need a global effort, just like we did with human trafficking, domestic and international. And it took a little extra effort to get that passed. Like I said, I worked on it for 3 years. I was the prime author of it. And everything we do today in trafficking, the core of that came out of the TVPA, Trafficking Victims Protection Act. We want that kind of effort so that in the most seamless way possible, comprehensive way possible, we're saying no, absolutely no to forced organ trafficking. And that's why we're trying to get this bill. It's camera ready. It's been through every trap. We've had all the hearings. We're going to do another hearing with hopefully some of these great men and testifying again, as they have in the past, to bear witness to a horrible truth. So, but the Africans, they're getting their organs ripped off. Nigeria and other places, there's no doubt about it. A lot of it is very clandestine, very quiet. But there is an ascendancy of this human rights issue that I find so troubling. You know, we always were concerned about the not dead yet issue, you know, taking an organ before someone is really able to do it. That's a very serious issue, but this is government sponsored, just like government sponsored terrorism. And the benefactor is, in this case, Chinese Communist Party and other dictatorships around the world.
Well, so we are out of time. Ethan, you have one closing comment.
Slightly confrontational remark on that. Look, there has been a tendency to a sort of a Marxist tendency to sort of say, okay, you know, actually this is a problem spread out throughout the world. You can find cases of human exploitation all throughout South America. It's poor people who are used and so forth. And I don't doubt that they've identified something that is partially true. China is the only country where this is state-sponsored and is doing this at scale. That is it. Wow. That is, there's no question about it, and that is the, you know, if we don't stop it there, it doesn't matter about the rest of it. Yes, there will always be excesses. There will always be a poor Indian farmer who sells his kidney. And that's a tragedy, and it's a horrible tragedy, but it's nothing like what we're talking about here. To take the cream of, you know, Falun Gong and the Uyghurs of that age and kill them for nothing. I mean, for their beliefs. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, what an amazing panel. So Ethan Gutmann, Wesley Smith, and Representative Chris Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you all. I would urge those watching online and those in person, if you would share the video once it's archived with friends, legislators, congressional staff, whoever you want to, assuming they're your friends. And if you're with us here in person, please join us for lunch. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely.